Welcome to Ladies Talking Love, Season 2, Episode 8, Empowering Our Kids by Teaching Consent. It's Ladies Talking Love, a community of women uncovering more joy and fulfillment in sex as we learn from experts and amazing women like you. Together, let's create a world where women's sexuality is celebrated and understood, beginning with our own. I'm your host, Ariel Finlinson. Let's talk love. This topic about consent can be heated, and I feel like we've probably all heard different sides of the coin saying consent is bad to teach in schools or it's good. But I hope that you'll give this episode a listen and see what you decide and see what will be helpful to integrate with your kids and your family. I remember an experience really well when I was a fairly new mom, and I remember my friend telling a story about her husband tickling her daughter and how her daughter would say, no, and he would keep tickling her because she was enjoying it and laughing, and how she had realized that he needed to stop when she said no, because what they were teaching her was that she wasn't in charge of her body. And I realized that I had totally done this to young kids so many times where they're like, no, don't tickle me, but you can tell they're laughing it and they want you to tickle them. And so I would keep going. And after this story, I really made an effort to start thinking about how I could teach my kids that they were in charge of their bodies. And one thing with the tickling now, if they say stop, I stop. And even if I can tell that they want me to keep going, but I won't keep tickling them until they let me know that they want me to keep tickling them. And it's been really good. My kids, I can tell, know that they're in charge of their bodies, and they're able to say, just today, one of my kids was able to say, Mom, I don't like that. You can do this to me, but don't tickle me when you flip me upside down when we were playing. And that was really empowering to me, that they knew they were in charge of their body and they could say no to something they didn't like and let me know what type of touch they were okay with while we were playing together. And of course, there are going to be situations where you have to change your kid's diaper or they need to take a shower to stay hygienic. And there are some of those, but we can explain and talk to our kids and give them control over as much of their body autonomy as we can. And Rosalia does such a great job talking about age-appropriate ways to teach about consent and help our children really understand not only consent, but sexual abuse prevention and what we can teach them to keep themselves safe and to know that they're in charge of their body and that they get to say what types of touch that they're okay with. I hope that you enjoy this episode and learn a lot of things that can help you teach your kids to be more safe through consent and sexual abuse prevention. Rosalia Rivera is a consent educator, abuse prevention specialist, sexual literacy advocate, TEDx speaker, change agent, and the founder of Consent Parenting. She is the host of the About Consent podcast and creator of Consentware. Rosalia teaches parents, particularly child sexual abuse survivors, how to educate their children on body safety, boundaries, and consent so that they can empower their families to prevent abuse and break intergenerational cycles. Rosalia is on a mission to end child sexual abuse, dismantle shame, and help survivors heal and become thrivers. Rosalia is certified through the Canadian Centre for Child Protection Commit to Kids program and Darkness to Light Stewards of Children program, as well as the Human Trafficking Prevention Training program On Watch by Safe House Project. Although Rosalia was born in El Salvador and grew up in New York, she now resides in Northern Canada with her partner and 3 young kids. Before jumping in, I just want to thank you again so much for being here. Thanks for being on this journey with me of learning. I love having you along. And as the holiday season is coming in strong, I just wanted to wish you a happy holidays and Merry Christmas and let you know that I'm planning to release our special Christmas Roundtable episode next week. So be looking for that. We're going to talk about couple traditions and how to kind of mesh these 2 traditions of families coming into your relationship, and it can be so hard to decide which traditions to keep. And I hope that you'll enjoy the episode. And also wanted to let you know that we're going to take a Christmas break, and we won't be releasing our next episode after the roundtable until about January 12th. So I hope you all have a great holiday season, and we look forward to being back with you next week and then in January. I'm so happy to have Rosalia with me on Ladies Talking Love today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I'm happy to have you on to talk with us a little bit about parenting and how to teach consent to our kids. I think this is a really important topic and one that can be really tricky to navigate, especially there's some views that I think they're hesitant sometimes to teach consent. I think partially because we don't know what it is. And so I'm so excited to have you on. Can you start off by giving us some background? Like, what is consent?
Yeah. One of the things that I think parents feel that's tricky about it is they think they have to talk about sex, and it's not about sex. It's actually about body rights. And the foundation of consent is really autonomy, that your body belongs to you and you have the right to say what happens with it and who is allowed to engage with your body. And so really that's what it comes back to. So when we talk about consent, it's about permission. Consent is really permission that you grant or don't grant to someone on how to engage with you. And in its simplest form, that's what it comes down to. So from there, the offshoots of it are talking about boundaries, how to figure out what your boundaries are, how to implement your boundaries, how to uphold your boundaries. So consent, boundaries, and autonomy are sort of a triangle that helps everyone understand how to be respectful, how to engage respectfully with each other's bodies. And that can be anything from like playing with siblings to sharing toys. Later on, when your child is older and the conversation needs to surround sexuality, then you can bring it back in, and your child will at that point really understand it because you've laid the foundation from when they're really young.
I think one of the things that can be kind of tricky sometimes on this topic as well is people are like, but if my child gave consent for sexual touch, then they give consent. Can you kind of give us some more background on who's allowed to give consent?
Yeah.
Especially with sexual touch.
Totally. And it's a great question because I think people don't realize that consent is about that, right? But then abuse prevention, helping children understand how to navigate those body rights, what is appropriate and not appropriate for their age, is where we talk about abuse prevention. And that's where you want to talk about body safety. You want to help them understand how to implement those boundaries and uphold them. And if they can't uphold them, then what do they do so that they don't have a repeat situation? So really, then we move into the conversation of abuse prevention and talking about private part safety and secret safety and all of those other pieces that children need to understand so that they can be safe and not be taken advantage of.
Yes, totally. Which I so appreciate that because I think sometimes we get those mixed up. And so we're like, wait, how does this fit together?
Yeah.
Let's get into that a little bit. So what are some of the things that we talk to our kids about consent wise? And then let's talk a little bit about the like sexual abuse prevention side.
Yeah. So, I mean, consent can be taught in really simple ways. For example, I mean, we also have to consider, and I think this is where parents get tripped up. We want to make sure that our kids are healthy and safe, right? So if our child wants to run across the street and you need to grab their arm, you're not going to say, can I have consent to hold your arm? Because your 2-year-old might just be like, I'm crossing the street because it looks fun, you know? So with that in mind, we need to teach our children when you're going to have to override their consent because of health and safety reasons. And then you have to examine as a parent, when are you enforcing things that really they should be having control over? For example, choosing if they want to wear pink or blue, or if they want to get their hair cut or let their hair grow long. Like that isn't a health and safety situation, unless it's like they're not brushing their hair and they're getting, lice or something because they're not being hygienic. That's a health and safety conversation. So as parents, we have to figure out, where do we draw that line? It's individual for everyone, and you have to figure out what that is for you. For some people, it's going to the doctor and your child has to get a vaccine. For others, they maybe are going to give their child a choice of when they get an exam, if they're going to allow the doctor to check their ear and play that out, right? So there's lots of circumstances. This is where consent education is really helpful for parents to start figuring out and learning more about. And then when we make that transition to abuse prevention, we want to let our kids know what is a safe touch, what is not a safe touch. How do you figure that out? How do you know who a safe person is, and what are the behaviors of a safe or an unsafe person? So those are the distinctions. Even something as simple as not forcing your child to give a hug to a family member or whoever it is, right? Out of quote unquote respect, because that's what's considered respectful in your family culture. So we want to make sure that we're teaching our kids about safety by giving them the ability to exercise their rights and do it in a way that is respectful for everyone involved, including themselves. So making sure that we're not pushing them to do things they're uncomfortable with for the sake of cultural norms. And, that can come across for some people as kind of crossing a line because, well, I grew up that way and my grandparents are expecting a hug and I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings or somebody's going to get offended. This is where I also talk about we have to also communicate with the people in our kids' lives about these things so that these aren't such tricky conversations anymore. And I think people feel like they're hard because not enough of us are having them and not enough of us are normalizing that. And that's where we need to move to so that we prevent the next wave of Me Too.
I totally agree with that. And I remember a friend several years ago, she was talking to me and she was like, I realized that when we're playing with our kids and we're tickling them and they say, stop, we need to stop because sometimes the tendency is to push that because they're having fun. But what is that teaching them? That they're not in charge. And that has stuck with me. And as I've learned more about consent and worked on teaching my kids, it's sometimes tricky sometimes, but like, sorry, mom, like they get to choose whether they give you a hug or not. And I'll sometimes give my kids a choice, like you can wave, high five if you don't want to touch them. But I think that's been empowering for my kids to get to choose. And it's been a little hard for some of our family, but I think they've learned and caught on as we've practiced it with them. So that's been really helpful.
One of the things that people should also remember is that we want to also be compassionate with the people in our children's lives who are well-intentioned, right? To recognize and validate, like, I know as a grandparent, you are hoping to have these experiences. And we want you to also be part of our safety team. So that means that this is how you can help our child practice safety. And that's also really important too. So just reminding them of the why, right? Because a lot of times people are like, well, I'm not a predator. Why should I have to? And it's like, well, you're helping us give our child the practice in a low stakes situation so that if they're ever in a high stakes situation, they've had enough practice setting boundaries that it's not foreign, right? It feels more natural to them to be able to do it. And it will increase the likelihood of them being able to set a boundary or at least recognize when something's wrong. So, if you frame it from that perspective, I think you'll get a lot more buy-in and less resistance.
Thank you so much for saying that. I haven't done that. So that's a good reminder.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about just, wanting them to be in charge or that we don't force them. But I think that is really helpful, bringing them onto our team and kind of explaining why. I really want to get into some of more concrete examples of how we teach consent and sexual abuse prevention. But before we do that, can you maybe just talk a little bit about why some parents might feel hesitant as we've kind of opened up this discussion? What are some blocks that may come up as we're working to kind of teach more about consent and sexual abuse prevention?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the resistance comes from this idea that I'm the boss and I should be able to tell my child when, where, and what. Actually, that sets up your child for becoming an easier target. So recognize that if you have this impulse to control, instead of teaching your child how to exercise their rights, you're saying you don't have rights until I say so. That's a really hard shift for a lot of parents if that's how they grew up, versus changing the way that you see your child as an autonomous being. So I think that's the first perspective shift that parents need to make in order to make that whole transition to consent parenting easier. The second is that I think a lot of parents get tripped up with abuse prevention because they think they're going to have to talk about sex and they're going to have to talk about sexual touch. How do I explain to my child that there's predators out there and like that there's people that could hurt them, and, you know, without scaring the child or transferring my own fears to them, right? And that was something that I know firsthand I experienced when I started learning about abuse prevention. And I had that fear because as a survivor, I didn't want my child to have this fear that could or could not happen and make them afraid of the world. So we have to remember that we're not taking away our child's innocence by giving them age appropriate sex ed. And, you know, if someone says, well, when age do I start? And I say, well, when they're like 2 to 3 and they're starting to potty train, most people are like shocked and they're like, what do you mean I have to teach sex ed? When we teach our children the correct anatomical names of their private parts, that's sex ed. So we're starting with just the foundation that is age appropriate. So, you know, I think that people need to just educate themselves first so that it removes that fear, because the fear is I have to talk about sex and it's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to teach. So start by educating yourself on what is age appropriate to teach your children so that they're informed. They understand their body parts. They understand their body part functions. They understand that their body parts, you know, those particular parts of their body have additional nerve endings and they may feel good. That doesn't mean that someone else is allowed to touch them. That doesn't mean that they're allowed to touch somebody else. Children are just naturally curious as it is, right? So you giving them information isn't going to make them more curious. It's actually going to satiate their curiosity and prevent them getting the wrong information from the wrong person or from Google, which could end up on a porn site, right? So we want to make sure that we become comfortable with what we need to teach them, and then use tools like books and resources that are easily available nowadays to help you teach those lessons.
And I think that's so crucial. I think a lot of us have this internal fear of like, the more I talk about sex, the more my kids are going to be sex crazed and go have sex. But the research all shows the complete opposite.
Exactly.
The more we talk about it, the more we talk about safety, it actually helps protect them and help them make safer choices.
Totally.
What are some of the differences you've seen in kids who understand consent versus those who don't?
Oh, it's like day and night. It's amazing. It's so rewarding to see a child empowered about their body, being able to vocalize, I need privacy right now, like close the door. That simple act lets a potential predator know, oh, this child might know more than I think and might not be the easiest target. And maybe if this is not somebody who I'm going to try to mess with. It really helps, number one, give your child that sense of empowerment, that understanding of their rights, which grows with them. To be able to be online as an older child, having learned all of these basic safety rules, and then go online and somebody asks them for something that's inappropriate or sends them something inappropriate, and you've discussed it, you've talked about it, that child is going to say, hold on a minute, this isn't right. I know what's okay, what's not okay. I know my mom or my dad are safe people to talk to about this. Even if I screwed up, even if I accidentally, talk to a stranger online, even though I was told not to, I know that I have a safe person to help me get to safety. And they will have that ability versus a child that is not aware, doesn't understand safety, and is just now basically become a target for a predator. The difference is incredible. And I hear this from parents all the time who are like, my child was able to tell somebody that they didn't like that, or they said someone touched my shoulder and I wasn't okay with it. And I told them, even that simple act, even though it wasn't a sexual touch, let that person know I'm aware of my body rights and I know how to speak up to say what those are. And I have safe people in my corner. That makes a huge difference. And it goes a long way in prevention. I mean, sexual abuse is on the rise. It has been on the rise throughout this pandemic. And we may think that this would never happen to our child because we know the people in our child's life, or we trust everybody, or this never happened to me, so it's not going to happen. That's not true. Unfortunately, the truth is that the percentages are high and they're increasing because we are not taking this seriously enough. And I apologize. I know I'm getting on a soapbox here.
No, I love this soapbox. You keep going.
But yeah, I mean, I think that we all as parents need to educate ourselves on this topic, recognize that the statistics are really high, and we need to educate other people around us more than just our kids. We have to be vocal about it. So, I talk about how much this impacts children and in terms of empowering them, but also us talking to other adults about it is equally as important, if not more, because we have to be our children's first advocates. We model to our children how to set boundaries by the way that we set them, by the way we educate and talk to others about it. By us not being afraid of this conversation shows them that it's okay to talk about these things, and we're open about it. And there's no hiding. This is full transparency. We got your back. We know that you have rights, and we back you up at all costs, right? Like, it doesn't matter who it is, what family member we're talking to, your safety trumps everything else. And when kids see that, they see that we're consistently talking about that, and we're open, and we let people know, they feel that much more empowered and safer, and are more willing to speak up and report, which is one of the biggest issues, right? Reporting doesn't happen for years. So, children get repeatedly hurt because they don't know how to access help. So all of these pieces, they get layered as we teach our kids. They learn more and more and more. They become more confident in being able to speak up for themselves. And the rates of reporting will increase. The rates of abuse will decrease.
Which I think is crucial, because I think a lot of us as parents, we can feel really nervous, like, I'm going to say it wrong. But I think just trying, we are going to say things wrong. We're in a work in progress trying to fix this culture and work on it. But if we take those steps to just try and keep opening up that conversation, like you said, it creates a safe space for our kids that they can talk about these hard questions or uncomfortable things that have happened, and have a safe place if something does happen.
Yeah.
So I think it's so crucial. Even if you're listening and like, I don't know how to do this, it's okay. We're all learning.
And it's okay to make mistakes. Like, you can say to your child, like, I was never taught this when I was a kid. This is all new. Starting from that place of like humble student yourself is okay. Kids are like, oh, okay, that's okay. Like, they're not going to judge you and say like, you're a bad parent. How do you not know this? They're just going to be like, okay, well, let's learn together.
Let's learn together. Yes, totally. I know we don't have enough time to cover everything, even though I wish we did, but can you just walk us through a couple age appropriate things, the examples about teaching consent?
Yeah. I mean, if anybody wants to dive deeper, I have a workshop on this. It's called Getting Started with Abuse Prevention, and it walks you through these pieces. So let's say that your child is 0 to 2. Well, there's a couple of things that you're going to do. One is that you're going to really manage or engage with your child in a more respectful and intentional way. So if you're changing a diaper, you're going to explain to your child what you're doing. So you're not necessarily asking for consent, but you want to communicate and start to show your child those physical cues, those facial cues. Let them know that you are engaging with them respectfully and that you see them as a person. I know that it may seem like my baby's not going to understand, but they're going to understand your intention. And in that time frame, also 0 to 2 is a great time to start preparing grandparents, caregivers, whoever is going to be also caring for your child. This is a great opportunity to say, this is how I plan to start teaching my child how to engage with my child. This is how I change their diaper and talk to them and let them know. Those are some of the beginning pieces. From 2 to 4, this is an amazing time to start talking about body safety. So private part safety is what you want to start with, because they're usually in that potty training stage. And you can start teaching them the names of their parts, their function.
Can you give us an example? Like, how would you teach private part safety?
Yeah. So, I mean, it can be as simple, like even when you're taking a bath, okay, I'm going to clean your vulva now, or we're going to wipe from the front to the back, or however it is that you're cleaning your child or helping with hygiene, you want to narrate and say, so this is what it's called. There's lots of really great books that teach about private parts for kids, so that, again, it's age appropriate, and that supplements what you're teaching when you're, narrating what you're doing in real time. You can talk about also who is able to help them, who is okay to help them clean, and that this is how they should clean and this is how long it should take, so that your child understands what to expect. And then they recognize when something's not the same, they're not doing it in this way, and then they can tell you, and building that into the conversation, right? Mommy is always wants to know if somebody doesn't do it this way, let me know, because we want to make sure that your private parts, which are yours only, and have that conversation about private part safety, are really only for you. And I also encourage parents, especially as your child gets closer to the age of 4, and you've talked about functions like your urethra, like is for where your pee comes out, and explain the functions. You should also explain the function of the fact that there are nerve endings that make those areas feel a little bit better, right? Like it feels nice. And that's okay if you feel like you want to explore your body, but that's a private activity. You shouldn't be doing that with anybody. Nobody should be doing that with you. So you're building the safety pieces into the private part conversations. And then from 4 to 6, you want to start talking about secret safety and educating them about the concept of tricky people, starting to teach them about how to access their safety network. So you want to build a safety network at that point that your child is also involved in creating. So who do they feel safe with? What makes a safe person? How do you recognize if there's a tricky person? Listening to their intuition. So you're getting into a little bit more complex, nuanced concepts, but they're a little bit older so they can understand.
How do you navigate teaching them about tricky people without, like you were mentioning before, like we don't want our kids to be terrified of everything and everyone, but we want them to be safe. How do you talk with them about that?
A lot of parents think it's a really complex concept, but you can use models from stories or movies or, shows that they watch where there is a tricky character. So something like in Frozen, for example, the prince in the first movie, he was a tricky person. He seemed like a nice guy, turned out to be the bad guy. So you want to let kids know, that's a tricky person, or using other examples from, and I actually have an Instagram reel where I show different examples of different characters for different age groups, right? So for an older child, maybe it could be Loki from the Marvel comic series, right? He was a tricky person for sure. So that kind of helps to frame what that means. It's someone who may seem like they're okay, but they're actually not. And then you start to help your child to understand how to listen to their gut. If something feels wrong about this person, maybe they're a tricky person. Don't just, take their word at face value. Check in with mom and dad and see, this person, I don't know, there's something that doesn't feel right, but they seem really nice, but it could be a coach, it could be anybody. So helping them understand. As they get a little bit older, you want to start maybe talking about things like how to navigate figures of authority, because a lot of times we, even as adults, think, oh, that person has a lab coat, they're a doctor, we trust them. That person has, is a firefighter, we trust them. So we have this idea of what figures of authority that are safe are, but that's unfortunately not always the case. So we want to say, if that person acts like a safe person, then they're a safe person. But it doesn't matter what, if they're a teacher, a coach, a principal, whoever it is, if they don't behave like a safe person, then they're not. So if they're asking you to break a body boundary, if they're asking you to keep a secret, if they don't make you feel safe, they're not a safe person. Doesn't matter who they are. All of these conversations are layered. You wouldn't start with that when they're 2. But each stage builds upon it the other. So if you are at the later stage and you're like, I didn't teach any of this, don't worry, you can still teach it. It doesn't mean that you're late to the game. It just means you have to start from the beginning and do a little bit of catch up, right? And that's okay. Yeah. Your child is still going to learn all of it and they're still going to need it. So don't feel like you're late. It's never too early and it's never too late.
I agree with that 100%, especially that was my next question. I was going to be like, what about for people who are like, I haven't started, I'm too late. I think it's never too late to be like, hey, I just learned this thing I didn't realize. Can we talk about it? This is really important to me to keep you safe. And I think we have so much power as parents to let our kids know that we're learning with them and that we're still figuring things out and we want to be a team together. Can you walk us through how you talk about secrets?
So secret safety is probably one of the most important things that you should be teaching your child. this is the currency of abusers. They want to make sure that the child doesn't report. So setting up a basic secret safety rule in your home. We don't keep secrets. Mom and dad are safe people. And, even if you are co-parenting, it's important that you agree with your co-parent. We are not doing secrets here. That's something that's non-negotiable. And if there is an issue, right, if the other parent is like, well, I don't agree with that, that's a bit of a red flag. So I would make sure that you double down on the information with your child and say, look, maybe the other parent is saying that secrets are okay. They're not. Here's why, right? And you want to educate kids on the difference between secrets, between
surprises.
Thank you. And also the concept of privacy, because that can also trip kids up, and they're like, well, but what if this is private information and I don't want to share it with anybody? So you want to create those distinctions, because here's the thing, and a lot of people don't realize this. Predators will test a child to see if they are willing to keep a secret. And it can be an innocent secret, right? So a lot of kids think, and I see a lot of parents do this, where they'll teach that there are good secrets and bad secrets. So we want to remove that language altogether. What we want kids to know is that there is no such thing as a good secret, right? There's surprises. They're meant to be shared. There's no such thing as a good secret, particularly from an adult to a child. So we don't want kids to ever think that secrets are okay, because that is a testing ground for predators. They may say to a child, oh, let's go get ice cream, but don't tell your parents, because then they might not let me give you ice cream anymore, and it's an innocent secret, like nobody's getting hurt, right? So if you haven't taught your child and then they keep that secret, now this predator knows, oh, that child's willing to keep a secret. What else can I implicate them with, right? So when abuse happens, the predator can use that against the child and say, well, you kept all these secrets, and if your parents find out about all these things, you're going to be in big trouble, right? So we want to make sure that we're making that really clear, and that distinction is part of our safety rules for home, that, you have a list of like, here are the safety rules. Keep a poster of that. Here is the difference between secret, surprises, and privacy. This is really critical information. I always say to parents, double down on that. Make sure that you're having this conversation. Don't leave it to chance, because this is where children will not have a sort of blueprint for how to report, right? So if somebody asks you to keep a secret, you can let them know, here's what you say to them. We don't keep secrets in our family, right? We have a secret safety rule. That's going to be a red flag to a potential predator who's going to say, okay, crap, like that's not a child that I can, manipulate, right?
Yeah.
So the more tools that we can give our kids, the more language, and then have some set rules, that's going to really empower your children to be safer.
And we want all kids to have that rule, no secrets, so that there's red flags for abusers.
It drives me crazy because I see so many books, kids' books, that talk about secrets in a fun way, or
yes.
Yeah. And it's like, no, that's not good.
That's
like we
not okay.
That. Yeah.
I'm still learning so much, and I have so much to improve, but that's one thing I've tried to do with secrets and surprises. And every once in a while I'll slip up and be like, oh, I have a secret. And my kids will be like, no, secrets are bad. And I'm like, oh, you're right. I meant it a surprise. So it's fun to see them have that space to feel comfortable and understand that secrets aren't good. Can you give us a little bit of background on privacy and private information? You touched on that, but what's the difference between that and secrets?
Yeah. So, we want to let kids know, and this kind of piggybacks on the idea of tricky people. We want to make sure, particularly like you can use the example of yourself, navigating the digital world, and say, if somebody who's a stranger asks me where I live, I don't want to just let them know, because I don't know them yet. I don't know if they're a safe person or an unsafe person, right? So in order to be safe in the world, I want to make sure that I am keeping certain information about myself private, and that includes our address, our last name, those kinds of things that are private information. That piece about private information is usually more for older children, especially if they're going to be online, to help remind them about why private information is important to keep private.
I love that so much. Yeah. Just remembering, like, we don't know if they're a safe person yet, so we don't share our phone number or our address or things like that. That is so good. Before we're starting to close up, do you have anything else that you haven't shared you'd like to add?
I just want to remind parents that, particularly anyone who is a survivor, because again, I'm a survivor, but for anyone who is, and they're feeling like this is a really hard conversation and it's potentially triggering, or you're just fearful that you're going to transfer your own fears and worries or paranoia even about it, just know that, first of all, the more you educate yourself and the more support you have on the journey of educating and teaching this to your children, so whether that's a spouse or a friend or a support group, look for that support so that you're not doing this alone. And you'll also be surprised to find that there are a lot of other survivor parents out there who are going through the same thing, and you can support each other through the process. Secondly, is that there are so many tools, so don't feel like you have to start from scratch to teach this completely blind. There are great books, there are great videos, you can find them on YouTube. You can find them on some great websites. If you go to my website, you can find a list of books that you can download. There are so many ways that you can teach this without making it feel as hard as you think it's going to be, and just get started. Like, even if it's just with one thing, and don't make this a one-off conversation. This is an ongoing process that you need to talk to your kids about as they grow up. So just get used to the idea that this is important to be talking about throughout their childhood into their adolescence, which is when they're going to need this even more. So we're setting them up for success by starting early.
Thank you so much. I will definitely put your website in the show notes. I was going to ask you for a list of those books. So yeah, perfect. Can you tell us where we can find you?
You can go to consentparenting.com. I'm also very active on Instagram, which is also at Consent Parenting, or on Facebook. I have tons of videos that I've done where I teach a lot of this information, and I have workshops available as well if you really want to deep dive into it.
And you have a podcast as well. What's that called?
It's called About Consent, and you can find that on any podcast player and on aboutconsent.com, where it's most of the episodes are about learning how to thrive as a survivor. It's for survivors, but also for those who support survivors. So even if you're not a survivor, but you know someone, there's so much that you can learn in terms of helping someone else heal.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rosalia. This has been great.
Thanks for having me.
This episode gave me so many good things to think about. I loved how she talked about talking with your kids about tricky people and how we can talk about it in terms that they understand with some of the movies that they've seen, especially really common ones, Disney ones. I loved hearing her age-appropriate tips for teaching body autonomy and private information, especially as our kids are getting older and are starting to do things more online. And I hope that this episode helps to spur some good conversations with your partner about what type of things you want to talk with your kids about and how you may be able to help teach them consent and help to prevent sexual abuse for your children. As always, thanks for talking love. Thank you to all of you who listen and join me on this journey, and to our Ladies Talking Love team who make the podcast possible. Thanks to our sound wizard, Kimberly Demers, our newsletter guru, Lauren Barton, and our miscellaneous task whiz, Jana Norman. As always, thanks for talking love.